Hi, and welcome to the TBC Podcast, where we talk about curious, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial questions through the lens of biblical wisdom. So today I'm joined with Dr. Buckner, and we're going to be talking about criminal justice and how we can think about criminal justice, again, through that lens of biblical wisdom. Really excited to have you here today. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So I know that you have got so many graduate degrees that I know that the onus is on me. If this conversation fails to be interesting, it's completely my failure to prepare. I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation today. So you are the head of our criminal justice department here at Trinity Baptist College, correct?
That is correct. I have several people that are helping me with the program, so I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge it. I've got quite a few people that are assisting me that are adjuncts.
So. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we're going to get a little philosophical here. When we talk about criminal justice, obviously one of the key concepts there is justice, okay? And I was hoping that you could share a little bit about, as a Christian, how does that change the way that you think about justice, and how important is it for Christians to have a clear concept of justice?
That's a great question, interesting question, because when you look at justice, it is looked at from two different lenses. It's looked at from a secular lens and also a biblical lens, because whenever I think about just commercials that I see on TV today, where they're asking, "Hey, would you like a Christian roofer? Would you like a Christian, somebody day labor to come in?" Well, what's the difference? And I look at it in the lens of justice from the same way. Justice is looked at from the perspective biblically as doing the right thing. And it should become intuitive because we should do the right things, period. But the world looks at it as justice as getting just desserts or getting just rewards or getting my way. So the biblical lens of justice is completely different than the world's view of justice, because the world's view of justice is, hey, I want it, I want to get my vengeance. Mm-hmm. I want to get whatever I can from the world, and the world owes me. Whereas a biblical view of justice is more mercy, more grace, more, hey, what can I do in a loving way to help you? So it is a completely different way of looking at things. I mean, just thinking about how the world looks at things and how we look at things is completely diverse and completely different. So, but I think the key is we've got to look at it from a biblical standpoint, right, and a Christian standpoint, because otherwise we're just like the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what separates our way of teaching and our philosophy concerning how we educate those going into this field of criminal justice.
Okay. So you mentioned from a Christian perspective, there needs to be an emphasis on mercy and grace as we're going and thinking about what it means to live justly. What would you say, and I feel like I'm starting with all like the broadest and biggest questions for you just to make it easy. What would you say is the end of the criminal justice process from a Christian point of view? So what's the goal that a Christian has in mind when they're thinking in terms of criminal justice?
Of course, first off, I go to is like career paths, and what could you do with a criminal justice degree, and how could you influence the world? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, when you get to the point of life, you're looking at what legacy or what have I left behind? What have I left for the world? Mm-hmm. And part of what I look at in the criminal justice field is you make a huge impact on the world. Typically every day that you're out there. Mm-hmm. So I look at it from different career paths. I look at it from police officers. I look at it from one of the things that comes to mind right off the bat is the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:9, whenever Jesus talks about blessed are the peacemakers. I mean, you call the police because you want peace, mm-hmm, because you want justice, and you want them to be able to come in and say, hey, I need this to be resolved. So they come in and they're peacemakers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus recognizing that off the bat. I look at that career. I look at the criminal justice field there. I also look at other positions that you can get into, such as paralegal work. And I also look at, think about it from a bigger perspective. What about a Supreme Court justice? I would love to have one of our graduates become a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And it'd be one of those things that, it would change the whole scheme of things. And we look at the world events, we look at what's going on, and we see why was it important that Supreme Court justices were just nominated? Why was that important that they have a biblical worldview or a Christian worldview? I think it really is an indication of what we would like to see in the world. So from a criminal justice perspective, I would love to see our students demonstrate that. And whatever they do, whether it be as a judge, whether it be probation officer, whatever the job field that God calls them to do, I think whatever it is that you decide to do, you make an impact into the world.
Yeah.
And you do it from a perspective of grace, mercy, as you just mentioned. And you see this in everything that we do as far as criminal justice work. Police officers, they show discretion. They have a large latitude of discretion where they can demonstrate grace and mercy anytime. Hopefully you've never been pulled over, but you just mentioned to me that you had
Plead the fifth on that one.
but you if you're on the side of the road and your car's broke down,
Yep.
who do you want to see? You want to see a police officer that can help you. So there's a lot that's involved in this career field as far as what we do and how we demonstrate that mercy and grace, because you get people that are disadvantaged or in a really bad situation, and they call you because they need help.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot. I think in our career field, we see a lot of this applied on a daily basis, even in the judgeship, even on probation officers, whatever the career field that they decide to go into. There's a lot of this grace and mercy and love shown on a everyday basis.
Yeah, that's really excellent. It definitely sounds, and it makes sense that one of the main roles that a Christian would be filling here is mediating peace, right? As Christians, the Bible says that we have peace that passeth all understanding, right? And so to be able to mediate that peace that we have in Christ to the world, that seems very important, certainly. And and I have been the recipient of that even recently, as we were talking about. My car broke down last weekend, and it was highway patrol pulled over, and they helped me and my family get to a safe location and where there was air conditioning, because we were on the side of the road in South Carolina. So definitely, I was very grateful for their influence. On that note, I was wondering are there any particular moments in your own life, in your career, where you can think of where you felt like you had the ability, the opportunity to mediate that peace to the people who you were engaging with?
Let's see. My career, just to give a quick synopsis of it, because I think it's really, so I was a police officer for 3 years right out of college, and then I was in the military. I was a military policeman, and then I was a paralegal in the last part of my military career before coming here to Trinity 20 years ago, which is amazing to even think about the time frames. But throughout those, there's been many times that I've been at automobile accidents where I've been able to help people. And one of the first things that you do as a police officer is you secure the scene, make sure everything's okay, and then you provide first aid. So there's been many times providing first aid, life-saving things those are really important, but it's also one of those things that it also gets you involved with the people. And so there's been several instances. To reflect back on a few of them, or I'll just give you one. There's one where I went to an automobile accident where people were involved. It was involved fatalities, and you're sitting there helping the people the best that you can, and then you're helping the people that come later, and so there's a lot of situations where you give peace to people, not just then but later on, and there's a lot of relationships that continue through the years where you continue to connect with those people, and they become long-term relationships. In this particular case, this accident involved a person that was about to get married, and so I was able to give first aid to the ones that were involved in the accident, and then they were able to get married and was able to carry on with their life. So it was
That's really cool.
Yeah, it really was. It was a cool situation, and it was a cool event that took place out of a really terrible situation whenever you first arrived on the scene. But there's quite a few situations. I remember in the military going down to provide help we provided first aid to Mozambique, and we went in after a flood, and it was one of those things that you provide food, you provide water, you provide clothing to people that are disenfranchised, and you're just really providing things for people. And you look at that, and that's just doing for others really is so biblical, because we should be, and again, that aligns so much with criminal justice, because whenever you walk out the door as a police officer, as any parole officer or whatever, you're doing for others throughout the whole day, and you're giving to others and constantly giving of your time, your effort, and your resources. So having that biblical foundation is so important, because demonstrating that love and grace and mercy is part of an everyday life that you do. Because
I could imagine somebody listening to this conversation so far and thinking, hey, I thought we were having a conversation about justice, and all I've heard is about compassion and consolation and peace and mercy. Because we often think of things like grace, mercy on one side of the spectrum, and then justice on the other side. It doesn't sound like you really see those as distinct, or maybe not completely distinct fields or domains.
I think justice is one of those things where there are consequences to our actions. I mean, I don't think you can dismiss it.
Right.
I don't think it should be our focus either. I think justice is one of those things where, again, if I was whenever we first started talking, what does the world look at justice? It's like just desserts. Like, okay, you owe me this. Yeah. I want this from you. Those kinds of reactions, from a biblical standpoint, you look at it and go, is that really? Because I mean, we know what the Scripture says: vengeance is mine. And so, are we really seeking that? Is that really what we're trying to do in in the criminal justice field? No, really, it's not. Yeah. So it's a contrast, because the world is going to look at it from justice. Whenever you call, you want them to take action against the other person.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not going to happen the way that you want it to happen. And the reality is it may not be the way that God wants it to happen.
Yeah. And I think it's so important to remember that ultimate justice doesn't come from us, right? We're not the be all end all of justice. And if you're looking for human beings to bring ultimate justice, you're going to be disappointed, because there are things that happen in this world that human beings just don't even have the ability to mete out that kind of judgment on. This tension that we sometimes feel between justice and grace and mercy, I really felt that a lot when I was younger. I was actually listening to a debate between an atheist and a Christian, and the atheist was kind of raising this objection that God is supposed to be all merciful but all just. And he was saying that can't be. You can't be both of those things completely. And, I really think that it just stems from a complete misunderstanding of the gospel message, because in Jesus Christ, I think more than anywhere else, you see perfect justice wrapped up in perfect mercy and grace. And that's always been so powerful to me, that you really can have this kind of marriage of these attributes of God in the person of Jesus Christ. Going back to the field of criminal justice, what would be some of the major challenges that you see facing a person who is working in that field, specifically who has a Christian worldview and is working in the criminal justice field?
I think some of the things that happen is the drain that takes place, because whenever you pour out yourself all day, and you give of yourself all day, you come home and it's hard to disconnect from that. It's hard to get into a family relationship and go, okay, how was your day? Well, there's so much of that you probably don't want to talk about, or you really don't want to carry that into your family life. So I would say one of the more difficult things for criminal justice people is, this is going to sound terrible, Keith, and I apologize for it right off the bat, but sometimes you just want to take a bath as soon as you come in, because of all the filth that you've been around. Because sometimes the world is not too nice, and it's not. So I think that would be probably the hardest thing, and one of the hardest things for me to get connected with whenever I first started into the field was, I did not realize the world was this abased. I did not realize that the world had this much corruption and this much, destruction. And so you walk out of it. I say from a Christian, especially from a Christian background, sometimes we live in a bubble. And so your bubble is going to be busted very quickly. And you're going to see things that you're like, man, I wish I did not see that. And I think the hardest thing for us is whenever we come back, is how do we look at this now and go, okay, how's God viewing this, and how can I connect with this after seeing such just really terrible things that have happened, such things that you read about in the Bible, and you're like, oh man, This is real. This is
you don't
true.
expect to come face to face with that.
No,
right?
And I mean, because you see the most vilest sins being carried out, and I mean, those that, and I've never dealt with it, but those that deal with sexual abuse, or those that deal with other abusive kinds of behaviors, how do you recoup from that? How can you deal with life after that? Because you can't just erase your mind and go, okay, well, I'm just going to forget about this. You can't do it. It's going to keep playing. And do you carry it over and talk to your spouse about it? Do you, how do you deal with it? Because, and I think that's the part I think that I'm glad we can talk about this in here, because PTSD is real for police officers, and post-traumatic stress disorder is one of those things. Whenever you look at it, it does carry over, because we witness so many things that are so violent, and so many things that are really just really hard to erase from your thinking process. And so I would say, putting this in a positive note, you got to get back into that relationship with God. And you got to say, okay, I mean, and you got to be a strong Christian, because it's easy to get pulled into the world if you're not. And it's easy for you to look for other ways of dealing with your stress, instead of doing it from a spiritual standpoint, doing it the way the world deals with it, which is drugs, alcohol, or other things. So a lot of people in criminal justice fields, they have to have a strong Christian worldview. Otherwise, they can get pulled right into, I had a teacher one time that had me demonstrate this or illustrated this by saying, okay, you're sitting in a chair. I want you to, a person was standing above him. Okay, who's going to win that battle? Who's going to be able to pull who up or down? And the reality is the world's going to pull you down. So I would tell anybody in this career field, be careful, look out, make sure you are well grounded and that you don't get pulled down.
Yeah. So I think it's probably worth saying at this point. I said you have a lot of graduate degrees. So you have degrees in criminal justice, obviously. You also have degrees in marriage and family therapy and pastoral counseling. And I think it's so cool that, you can really see the marriage, for no pun intended, right?
Yeah,
of those different fields. And it's such an interesting combination, but I'm so grateful that you're here and are able to speak to these, really pressing issues for people who work in the criminal justice fields. I think that's really cool. So talking about grounding yourself as a solid Christian, what are some of the practical steps that you would recommend to someone who's dealing with these kinds of things and they want to ground themselves biblically? They want to experience that peace of God. In very practical terms, what are some things that you would recommend?
I would recommend what you would say is typical things to do. I'd recommend staying in church, recommend Bible reading, praying. And I think that's just normal things that we do as Christians. But, I think it's one of those things that whenever you're working in these shifts, sometimes you may work shifts that aren't, it doesn't work out time-wise. And so you have to make a special effort to say, okay, I'm going to stay connected and stay connected to the church and stay connected with a body of believers and get involved in small groups, get involved in because you need to see the world from a Christian perspective. And because you're out there in the world and you're seeing all the negative, you need to see the positive. And I think the key is, again, church attendance, praying, staying in the Word of God, and being around other believers. Yeah. And I think I would say that's true for anybody. But I think in the criminal justice field, it becomes a little bit more difficult because of the time shifts and the work schedules, because you may not have that ability as much. And to be honest with you, you're looked at differently. I mean, if a police officer walks into a room dressed in they're looked at completely different. So, which gets you to that point of, are you ever off duty? Do you ever, because most times, you and I, we were just talking about summer break. Right. Well, we get a break. Well, when do they get a break? Yeah. They're pretty much always vigilant, always on duty, always looking. And if something happens, they're always on call. So I think it's really important that they have what you just suggested, a way to get connected, a way to get connected to church, to the Word of God.
And it requires some special intentionality, it sounds like, to make those things happen.
That's true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Okay. I want to jump ship a little bit. I want to talk to you about the relationship between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. In my own life, this is a tension that I sometimes feel, when I'm driving down the highway, going the speed limit, and everyone else is like flying by me. It's like, why does this law even exist? And I think even in the Bible, that this was a tension that existed in some places. I think that, you would see, I think of like Jesus healing on the Sabbath, for example. The Pharisees were quick to point out that there were certain rules that they had set up that, that they didn't like Jesus, that the way that he was going about it. And, Jesus says, well, the Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. This is something that was given as a gift to you. So with all that said, this will be a very open-ended question. When you're operating in the realm of criminal justice, do you sense a real tension between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and how do you navigate that?
That is a interesting question because, you look at the laws. I'll talk about the biblical part, and then I'll switch over to the criminal justice part. I mean, there used to be 613 laws, and you look at that and go, "Whoa!" Now, when Jesus came on the scene, he basically pointed out there's two that I'm really interested in that you follow. So you look at it and go, "Okay, where was that?" Okay, you got the Ten Commandments, you got all this, but if you could narrow it down to two, he does it, which is amazing. So did that mean the others went away? Did the Ten Commandments go away? Did the other 600 and do quick math, two go away, or three? So no, I mean, so criminal justice wise, the laws are in place the same way that they're in place from the Bible. They're to give us a structure. Now, the question gets around to, is it the letter of the law, which basically gets into, is there discretion? And there is. So the spirit of the law versus the structure of the law is in place to keep people, making them do the right things. Mm-hmm. And because without that, people are going to do whatever they want to do. We see that in the Old Testament over and over. Every few years, every generation, you would see, well, they just did whatever they wanted to. Yeah. And the reality is, the law is set up for that in our system, in our justice system, and it's different too. If you're in criminal justice, and I would encourage you to get into it, we will discover that their laws are different in other countries than they are here, because we tend to think just the way the United States does their laws. And I get it. I mean, you're traveling down the road and people are going past you. I mean, if you get pulled over and you're like, okay, well, it was 60 and I was doing 69 because I understand that, you're not going to pull me over unless I'm doing more than. No, that's not true, because the law is 60. So you're going to get pulled over and you can get a ticket for that. But we tend to look at it and go, oh, well, we want grace given to us whenever those are the situations. We're like, well, I shouldn't have been pulled over. All these people are going. Well, the letter of the law is still there, and it's there for a reason. It's for our safety. I mean, it really is. I think about the law of Moses, and you think about the fact those Ten Commandments were there for safety. I mean, it was for our safety. And I think our system is set up in the same way. These laws are to protect us. I will mention this, though. One of the assignments I give to my students is, let's look at some of the archaic laws, because, and then I'm going to relate it back to the 613, because one of the things that happens is we never take any laws off the books. Mm-hmm. So now it's illegal for you to take a horse up to the town square and not rope it to a post. Right. Well, I mean, where's that law applicable? Yeah. Well, the same thing happens with the 613. Some of these laws aren't applicable anymore. So whenever you look at the letter of the law now, you're going, well, what do you do with the old laws? Well, nobody ever removes the old laws. They're still there. And you look at it and go, well, when's the last time a horse went to the town square? Yeah. And so I have my students write an assignment about some of these old laws, and just for fun, just let them see, and just also let them see that these old laws still are there, and they could be applied, but there's no reason for them anymore.
Right. I think that's really helpful, though. I mean, I teach classes on ethics, and something that my students often struggle with is that there's a very tight relationship between ethics and the law, but they're not the same. And there are certain value systems that are in place that we legislate, right? And so we make laws because we have values, but those laws aren't like creating the value system itself. And sure. I think that some of the things you're talking about there touch on that. Maybe a related question would relate to civil disobedience. In the Christian tradition, there's been a lot of conversation about civil disobedience. And I think generally speaking, it's understood that there could be times when it might be okay to break a law Specifically, I think back to the early church when the Christians were being pressed to say Kaiser Kyrios, right? Caesar is Lord. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not going to do that, right? We're not going to worship Caesar. We have a responsibility to only worship God. So first of all, maybe you could just say a word about whether or not you think there is still or could be a place for civil disobedience today, and then does that ever create tension for Christians who work in the criminal justice field?
I think civil disobedience, if we look at it from the perspective of what you can do, especially in our country. Our country is different because civil disobedience in lots of countries, it's not an issue because it's not allowed. In our country, we allow to a level of civil disobedience. You can gather as long as you're not as long as it's not a mob that's causing any kind of problems or any kind of destruction. You can gather together, and as long as you're not rioting or doing anything again to where you're causing disobedience towards the civil rights of others. So I just want to point out it is different here in the United States. We are allowed a little bit more latitude. As far as whenever I look at this from how do you weigh it out? I think it's one of those things where it's difficult to not take a stand because you're going to take a stand on what you believe, but you still have to support the law. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're supporting things that you are not going to be wholeheartedly in favor of. I think about some of the laws that were passed that were really, caused a lot of disruption, and even the prohibition was one that really caused a lot of problems in our world. And I think we have to be careful whenever we do pass laws that go against what the majority of the people, and I think we have to be really aware of the fact that police officers, sometimes we enforce laws that we are not in support of. And we're not, and that doesn't mean that you have to be in favor of the law that was passed. You have to support it, and you have to then turn around and go, okay, I've got, this is my civil duty to do this. This is part of my job. I think though part of your question is, what if this goes against your beliefs?
Yeah. So how deep does that go, right?
Yeah. And I think that would be a huge, hard question that we would have to answer. And each person would have to decide on that, because if I was told, okay, I've got to do something that what I would consider is immoral, I would have to go, no, I can't do that. I'll give you, I don't know, it doesn't equate, but it's a scenario that I had to make a decision on. I was overseas. The first war started, Desert Storm started, and I was on the tarmac, and I was my family was getting ready to fly out, and we went into what's called alarm red. Well, legally, I was supposed to put on a gas mask. I'm sitting there looking at my family, and they're getting ready to get on the plane. They don't have a gas mask. They don't have a chem suit. So legally, I was supposed to do that. Morally, I couldn't do it. I could not look at my kids and my wife and say, okay, I'm going to put this suit on. I don't have anything for you. Did I disobey what? Yeah, I did. So, again, I think it's a choice you have to make, but I was not about to do that. And in front of my kids, in front of my wife, and just tell them, well, okay, well, I'm more concerned about me, and this is what the law says. The law says I'm supposed to do this. So, and maybe that's not a good analogy or a good illustration, but I think we're going to face those kinds of decisions possibly.
Yeah.
And you got to decide what's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy because it illustrates that there's there could, at least theoretically, be a tension between what's moral and what's legal, and ultimately, we need to live morally, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we just got a few minutes left. Maybe you could just say a word before we close up about somebody who's interested in going into the criminal justice field. What are some things that you would recommend for them personally, and then maybe professionally as well, that they start? I'm thinking particularly of someone who's maybe in high school and thinking about criminal justice. What are some things that they could start doing to prepare themselves on various fronts for a career in criminal justice?
I would say number one is make wise decisions, but I would say that for anybody, make wise decisions. Because I'm just going to be very upfront here. Mm-hmm. Part of what happens is, we have people that want to go into police fields and they've made unwise decisions and they're disqualified because of, whatever, usually it's drug use. I would say don't. Do the things that are legal and do the things that are right, and as a high school student before you even decide to get into this field, because you can't be doing things illegally and expect the police department to hire you because they're not going to. I would say if you're interested in law, start studying law because it's fascinating. It's very deep. And studying these court cases, especially these major court cases, study them out and understand what they're saying and what they mean and the implications of what those are. And I would say if you're looking at it from a Christian perspective, get that strong Christian background. Get that really the foundation that you need for your life going forward, because it's going to pay off in the long run. But I would say just be wise in your decisions, especially because you're going to be swayed. As a high school student, my goodness, the peer pressure is unbelievable. And I would say keep doing the right things because it will pay off in the end.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Dr. Buckner, thank you so much for your time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I'll just say to our listeners, if you know anybody who is interested in curious conversations such as these, please make sure that you share and subscribe and like the videos. And we so appreciate you being with us. So until next time, take care.